for now, the main event, the reason why we're all here, besides the food, which you paid for, and obviously the stickers, I'm going to pass the mic on to Jyri, but the phone doesn't work, so you're going to have to shout like I am.
Alright.
So, I'm sure we'll get another mic in a minute.
And shall I?
Well, everyone else is podcasting, so here we go. Jyri, you question.
Yo! Okay, so does this work?
Yeah. Yes. Kind of, yeah.
Great. Alright, well, first of all, I just felt like I should give some kind of a sign of gratitude to our host, Ian, because it's, you know, this is a fantastic thing. It's the first geek dinner that I have the opportunity to participate in. I don't know if anyone else here is like at a geek dinner for the first time. Almost no one. Oh, some people are. Okay, so thank you so much for, you know, making this possible.
It's only dinner because everyone else is here, so.
And right, so I actually wasn't prepared to give a talk, although I have some things that are always on my mind that I'd like to talk about. So I thought maybe I could explain a little bit about the thinking behind, more generally, the way that I try to approach stuff that's happening on the web, and especially related to all this buzz around web. Here goes the, you know, Reddit word 2.0. And then maybe we can sort of continue on to talk about microblogging, but from that perspective. Is this nice? Yeah. And like, feel free to just interrupt and we'll get a conversation going. But a lot of the things that I do, for me, started maybe about 3 years ago when I was still working as a sociologist. That's my training. I'm not a technologist by training, although I've been making websites and then more recently mobile devices at Nokia for pretty much all my life. And when I was looking at things from this academic perspective, there was something of a question that I sort of kept asking myself every time I looked at a new website that came up, which was basically, why is it that, you know, this was around, like, let's say 2004, we had a lot of social networking sites coming up. We had stuff like Friendster and all these different stirs, and a lot of them just failed very rapidly. You know, they came out, but they didn't survive for very long. So I kept asking myself, why is that? You know, what explains why some of the social networking services survive while others fail? And it didn't seem like there was. Okay. I need to unload my vessel, so still we are hearing. Right. Okay. Good. So, the question I sort of want to try to answer is there a way to explain, especially when, you know, I guess almost everyone here as you know, geeks, we are actually hacking together new stuff and we're creating new services. And from that perspective, it sort of sounds like a relevant question to be able to answer, well, what are the defining criteria that define a successful service that I should take into account when I'm creating a new service? And so one of the ways I think it's useful to approach this question, what I try to do is to look at it from the perspective of what I call this object-centered sociality. It sounds very academic, but I'll try to explain very briefly what I mean by that. I think we're getting music.
Oh no, they're playing like wind instruments.
Don't worry about it. Saxophone, makeup,
It's alright, just carry on.
So, I sort of revelation for me was when Russell Beatty wrote a blog post where essentially it was around the time when a lot of people were signing up to LinkedIn, and he said he's linking out. If anyone remembers that post, and it was because essentially Russell said he's linking out because LinkedIn has done nothing at all for his life that is useful. So this is very distracting.
It's all jazz.
Try to syncopate.
Bring the soul.
It's like the beat generation.
I feel like the crowd should be dancing. I'll try to sort of adapt to the
Say
tunes.
something. It's Jack Kerouac.
So, okay, so when you look at the way like something like LinkedIn evolved, essentially.
You're really loud down the back, so we can hear you fine. So just sleep music and you'll be alright.
Nice.
That was beautiful.
And you realize that essentially LinkedIn sort of grew up as a game of people competing for who had the most contacts wins kind of thing. And that's really great for viral growth when we want to get a lot of people to sign up to a service. But after a while it starts to just grate. And when you compare the way other services online that were emerging around the same time, like Twitter and Delicious, or let's say something like Last.fm evolved, it seemed like there was a different model there. So one of the ways that I would suggest that you can try to sort of apply this theory is when you go to a website, or sort of what I've been doing and what I'm actually going to talk about more about at this conference is these sort of 5 key principles for designing web services, and they're sort of working principles. I thought it might be useful to share them here and see if we can actually come up with something new, maybe new principles. And the first one is, try to define the object around which that service has been built. So the idea of the social object is essentially that it's the reason why people connect to each other. There's a theory about social networks, and the whole notion of social network actually has some theoretical underpinnings, which is essentially that the social network is a map of the relationships between individuals. So imagine the network diagram when you have nodes connected together by lines. And there's a problem with that. And the problem is that it assumes that those nodes are people. And it's just people connecting to people connecting to people. So this object-centered sociality approach differs by saying, well, that's not very accurate, because in reality, people are always connected together by a shared object. So it's people, object, person. And when you think about that, then, for instance, a date and a job will connect you to 2 very different groups of people. And when you look at websites, I think it's useful to start by asking, what is the object here around which it is assumed that people will be creating social networks? So on some sites, it's actually much easier to answer that question than on others. So for instance, on something like Flickr, it's the photograph, it's obvious. And I think Flickr is a great example, because then you can, once that's clear, you can then begin to imagine all kinds of social networking ways that people would be used for people to social network around photos, like commenting, tagging, geo-tagging. There's a lot of different ways. Or you think about Delicious, the bookmarks. You think about Last.fm, music tracks. YouTube, it's the videos. When you go to a website, or when you're building your new web service, I think how quickly you can answer that, what's the social object there, how quickly you can see it on the site, it's just a design question. It's so crucial.
What is it for MySpace?
That's a good question. I think for MySpace, it's actually music, because that's the core around which MySpace was built.
And my prediction is that the second MySpace loses sight of that core social object in their service, they're in trouble. Because it's going to start to become a mush, and there's just, you know, the end, we're not going to find that core thing there that differentiates it from other social networking sites.
What about Twitter? What's the core there?
That's a really good question, because it's clearly the tweets. And that's a totally new kind of object that hasn't existed online before.
Yeah, but people also tweet the Jaiku.
Yes, Jaikus and tweets are pretty similar.
So it's status?
I think, yeah, status, and we're trying to figure out what the different social networking kind of hooks are around those status pages, because Twitter's doing the ad stuff and finding ways to thread, because the whole point of the network is you find ways, like on Flickr, you know, through tags, you can link together photos after photos after photos, right? And so we're just trying to figure out what the cool ways are in these status messages to actually, you know, generate sort of never-ending networks from them. Yeah.
How about like TechCrunch? Is it about Michael Arrington? Is it about the information about Web 2.0? Is it about the chat that goes on in the comments? I mean, I'm not saying I have an answer. I'm just saying, what's your?
I think TechCrunch is a more traditional model where it's essentially a published media of edited articles, and there's a topic for those which is always something about, you know, something new in tech. And they write the articles, and it's like on any blog, the blog post, or on a newspaper, the article is the object. And then you figure out, but usually the ways to social network around those are pretty poor. I mean, that was the whole point of blogs, is that they sort of exploded and created new ways to network around articles, because you got commenting, you got trackbacks, you know, technorati tags, different ways, and that's the whole revolution in the blogosphere that happened.
Yeah, could you read like I'm going to name a really good blog like Buzz Machine, Jeff Jarvis has tried. It's a really great source of information, but it's also just about Jeff.
Right.
Right. Whereas like something like TechCrunch, something like YouTube, it has nothing to do with YouTube.
Yeah.
Everything's about the videos of the other people.
Right.
YouTube is irrelevant. You couldn't remove. You could not remove Jeff Jarvis away from Buzz Machine. You couldn't remove me from Gaping Void. You could not remove, you know,
you're
Peter
creating
from
social objects out of yourselves, essentially, and that's the celebrity model. That's what celebrities do. That's why
it has a limitation.
Movie actors are social objects, and they, you know, as anyone who's been in contact with famous people knows, they tend to actually, you know, constantly be negotiating that public, you know, object that they are, and then it's a private thing there, and it creates problems in the personal.
Brilliant.
But I wanted to come back to these points. So the first point is like, what is your object? You know, you got to be able to define that. That's the first principle. The second principle is, what are your verbs? So if you go on a site like eBay, right next to their logo, like within 40 pixels of their logo, there are two buttons, buy and sell. And I think that's really telling great design, because it's absolutely clear from the beginning what you can do on this site. So if you go on sites, I've done this before, it's like collecting the verbs that you can pick out quickly. So on a site like Dogster, you know, the social networking community around dogs, founded by an awesome Ted Reingold, it's add a dog. That's their key verb that sort of pops out. On Flickr, it's upload a photo. So, you know, that's the second point, is like, what's the verb here, and what's your key verb for that thing that you're creating? And then the third point is make the objects shareable. So the basic way of doing this is to provide permalinks, which in itself was like a huge revolution when it took place with blogs, because, you know, essentially blogs, for the first time you really had permalinks to articles, because, I mean, I'm sure Jason remembers, like, all these news sites and stuff, you used to have links to like a dynamic page where, like, the next week there'd be a different content on that link. Totally useless. So it's still incredible how often you actually find sites that don't provide valid permalinks to the object. So that's like this shareability question. That's the first point. But you can go much further than that, because you can imagine, I think widgets are like an example of you figuring out innovative ways to enable people to share those objects. Probably the kind of most extreme is P2P file sharing networks, where the objects are the files, and the files themselves are sort of what gets shared through the system. So that's very powerful when you can do that. So this is like the third point. Then the fourth point sort of relates to that, but it's like I had this conversation with Reid Hoffman, the founder of LinkedIn, and it's funny because I've been a little critical of LinkedIn in the past, and actually LinkedIn has since then I think changed into a much more useful service, and it's a service that I've actually used to recruit people since then, because they sort of refocused around jobs, which really is the object on LinkedIn, and have been quite successful at it.
It's still pretty annoying. I mean, the thing
Not
is,
when
like,
you're looking for somebody to come work at your company.
yes, I
Yeah.
guess that's true, but it's just I keep on getting
I agree with
LinkedIn kind of links, and
It was
it
really
means
annoying
nothing to
for,
me.
I found it very annoying for 2 or 3 years.
How many,
And I
how
find
many
it
people are you
indispensable
connected
for
to,
last
Jason?
year.
Like how many people?
I have, I think, like 2,000 or something.
2,000, yeah.
It's
But
ridiculous.
surely when you get to 2,000 users, does your network not become redundant? I mean, you know, you've got 2,000 people connected to you.
Yeah, but
on
if
your
you do a
social
search for PHP in Santa Monica or 50 miles, it's down to 300, and then you type
Yeah.
in like, you know, looking for a job and you're down to 100, and then you make a list.
But LinkedIn is not your social network, though. It's not a network of
Well, I
your
think,
social
but you're,
It's a recruiting tool.
You're assuming that you know everything about all your direct contacts. So, for example, you know, if I network with Jason later, then I've now got access maybe to his friends. I can't remember all the people, all the things about all my friends, his friends, and that's what LinkedIn does. He's got 2,000 contacts. That gives him what 80, 100,000 people that
I
might
know
be interested in
about 50
access.
of them though. Very well. And there's about another 50 that I kind of remember.
It's kind of doomed for like recruitment agencies for one thing. If people like us, and
Absolutely,
will be
which is
the
great.
next
Just
Vanguard.
intermediating. Screw them. What about you? But travel agents too. You want to put travel agents back in the process?
Well, I don't know. I feel bad for travel agents. You walk by on the street and you see
you wanna-
people in a
would you
travel
wish that
agency shop
job-
sitting there doing
Can
nothing.
we let Jyri
Oh, sorry.
finish his points?
We're just trying to give him a break.
I'm just
Maybe
enjoying
fair.
my
And then do Q&A.
Alright, so, okay, so but there's something that Reid said that I wanted to communicate to you, although he specifically forbade me to tell this. And so I'm not disclosing his secret formulas for calculating virality, but he said something, and this is not what he said, but it's sort of what I took from him. And when they were doing, you know, Reid was obviously one of the founders of PayPal, and one of their, at some time during the early history of PayPal, they had a problem because they weren't growing fast enough, and they needed to figure out a way to get people. They had the invite thing, so you could invite a friend, but people weren't really using it. So the question is, like, it's not enough if you talk about virality to just provide that at, you know, email invitation to friend functionality as such. But what you gotta figure out is a way through which that invitation becomes a gift, a valuable gift that the person can offer to their friend. And when you think about it, so what they did in PayPal, this is what Reid was telling me, is that their virality shot up once they issued a campaign where when I invited you to PayPal, you got automatically $10 deposited to your account from PayPal. So I'm essentially giving you $10, free money, and you know, okay, that's a service built around real money, and it's not always financial capital that, you know, you can imagine other forms of value too. And actually, like I think that YouTube is probably the greatest example, because you know, I get YouTube links to videos from my Hotmail friends. You know, that's people who are not onto Web 2.0 who still use Hotmail, and so they're emailing these things during the day, and they're doing that because they're funny. The videos are funny. So it's like, if you can, for free, free, basically. Give your friend a smile during a very boring day at work. You know, what is a better gift than that? Probably nothing. So in this way, you know, I think like it's really, really important to think about, you know, what can you offer in terms of a gift? Like on Skype, I think it's like when I was at one of these conferences, I think it was TED, and Skype was handing out, Nicholas Nestor was there, and they were handing out these, it's when I got my first Skype headset, and one of the nice things was, in the package there was not one, but 2 headsets and installation discs. So essentially you're there, and so I went and I installed it for my mom, and you know, taught her to use Skype, and said, well, you can also save on your phone bills through this. So it's like, on Skype it's like the other way around. It's like, it's a gift because I'm giving them free phone calls, and I'm taking all this trouble to install it for them. So some way to put that gift in there, I think. And a lot of services, like, I don't know, Doppler, I don't know if Matt Jones is here yet, Dan Gilmore just left. Doppler is this sort of exclusive, invitation-only based travel service. Might be open nowadays, but it didn't used to be. So a lot of services seem to use that, so it's like an exclusivity. You give that exclusive invitation, it's like for G-Talk.
Yeah, but some of these things don't work because A, they geared towards a geek community. And so they filter through and they percolate up and down and then they fill that space up. And if you give these kind of kudos-based invitations to people, it's quite lackluster sometimes. And unless it's actually geared and based in like true value and because you feel to do it, then it kind of fades down. I mean, look at tribe.net. You were talking earlier about, you know, social networks that went like that and went down. Tribe is a perfect example.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. It's one of the things, it's like when you do this sort of social value, it's always constructed in a particular community, and communities changed. I mean, it's like, you know, we're used to clubs, you know, going up and on, and I think it's like less than 2 years now, the average lifespan of a club in London. So it's similar to social networking sites where it's part of it is generational, and part of it is just that it moves with trends. But I still think that there are, you know, these other cases of services where there's like a more sustainable value that you're actually giving, and that's kind of my point. Is that, you know, when you figure that out, then you're rocking. So that's point 4, and the last point, just to finish off this, so we can start your conversation, is because a lot of people come and they ask about business models, and that's a really hard question to answer. When the answer is really like, duh. There is none at first. And so, but I sort of formulated this way to answer it, which is like based on this idea of freemium, where it's something that, again, another person who's advising or is part of this Jaiku with what we're doing, Joey Ito, once said a long time ago, was that this was like way before iTunes. He said there will be a time when people will not pay to download or consume music, but they will pay to publish their playlists or their taste, their recommendations. And you sort of look at what's happening now, and I think like Last.fm is sort of going into that territory where it's shifting that model around. So the point, my principle is, you got to figure out a model where you are charging not the spectators, but you are charging the publishers. So, in a sense, I think like TypePad, you know, an example where you paid for blogging service, where you're charging again people for publishing, not for reading. This is still something that is very difficult for some of the newspapers that I've been talking to, especially in Europe, to understand, because they want to charge like cable companies for the content or like music business. So we're figuring out a way where they can change their service around, so they're offering this stuff that everybody can consume for free, and they can still put ads alongside it. They do an ad-supported thing for free, and then charge the people who want to actually become pro users and start sort of publishing stuff out is key. Yeah. Another example, Habbo Hotel, you know, this virtual world for kids that I was involved in at the beginning.
Can I ask a question about that?
Sure.
As I understood it, when it started out, it was a big North American thing, massively North American. But that, I mean, I know it began in Sweden, was it?
Finland.
Finland. But it seemed to be populated largely, especially in like 2002 or so, 2001, with North Americans. It was crazy. So is that still the case, or is it more European now?
I don't have the exact figures, but I know that Apple has always had a lot of trouble in North America. So it started off as a pretty, I think it started off in Europe. Like they grew very rapidly in Netherlands and Brazil and Asia, but they've not been that successful in North America. And I could be totally wrong, but this is
maybe I was hanging out in North American rooms there.
But anyway, so the point that I think Hello kind of has to illustrate is they went into Japan. I helped connect the founders to a friend of mine, Niraj Janji, who was doing stuff in Japan, and Niraj said, let's do a Japanese because it's all practical, you know, it go well with Japanese. So they translated the thing and sort of Niraj launched it there. And in Japan, in iMode, as I'm sure everyone's aware, the basic model is subscription. You pay a monthly subscription fee of like 300 yen to get a service on your iPhone phone. And so they used that same model. And it just didn't work at all. People were not really signing up at all. But when they switched that around and did what they're doing now everywhere, which is that, again, this basic usage is free. But once you get to the point where you have your own room, and you want to actually start arranging stuff there, so you invite your friends and you orchestrate activities that take place in your own little virtual world. That's when you want to start paying for the furniture that they sell.
I used to have loads of pink polar bear rugs.
Pink polar bear rugs, yeah, those are my favorite too. So just to illustrate the point, so when you turn it around and you think about it as a way, how can I make money off of that? I think that's a kind of fair model because you can always then bring new cool features that the publishers will want. It's like, you know, Flickr, so you get a pro account once you're ready to actually start uploading massive amounts of photos there. You can still use the service for free and you can always view all photos for free. Yeah, you.
I have a problem because I work in marketing, okay?
What, wine?
Well, that's part of my remit, yeah. And not just wine, but I've got a lot of other businesses that I work with in Mono and everyone's trying to like talk to me about, you know, what's going to be the ROI. And I always tell them, well, you know, we're trying to create viruses here. And the thing is, viruses are unpredictable. That's why we call them viruses. That's why we use, you know, the metaphor virus to describe what we're doing. Because if they're predictable, we call them something else. Now, for example, you're in a space, you know, Jaiku, which I use, by the way. Cooler than Twitter.
I can't figure it out. I really can't.
Yeah, but it's like but right now Twitter is the nom de jour, right? And just because Twitter, for whatever reason, went viral, and that's unpredictable. You have no more control over Twitter going viral than Twitter has going viral. And I think a lot of the space is understanding.
Right.
But what about return on investment, which is what he was talking about?
What?
Return on investment, ROI.
Oh,
that's what he was talking about.
Yeah, but it just to me the thing is like you know, just the understanding that, you know, you try stuff, some stuff works, some stuff doesn't.
In my experience, return on investment in this space is non-existent. I mean, you speak to a brand manager who's looking after, say, Pirates of the Caribbean. He
brand managers don't matter.
Yeah, but they can look after their jobs.
They're extinct. They make £70,000 a year, right?
I'm going to have to review
that does not matter.
But I mean, in terms of return on investment, the only comment that I would have is that I have a really hard time. I work in mobile blogging, and so it's people sending pictures or video up to the web. And so when it comes to explaining to a client who's paid us 10 grand or 5 grand, that all we can give them is uniques, return visitors, amount of time spent on the site, without any actual sign-ups based upon it, because it's not a microsite, it's a fucking community service that they're tapping into. There is no ROI. And so it presents a bit of a problem when they talk to their clients, if they're an agency, or if they're actually the brand.
Agencies don't matter either.
Well, I think one of the ways that actually, now I find myself quoting my girlfriend, which I've learned is not usually a good idea. But she was kind of talking about this in her next column in magazine Craft, where she's talking to the crafters, and interestingly in that community apparently the same ROI issue surfaces. And her point is that, well, if you can demonstrate that what you're essentially creating is a community of passionate evangelists who go and promote your service because they are creating something using the tools that you provide, and they start to rely on your service, or to whatever it is they're doing in their identity and their creativity, then that is you think about Apple.
It's hard to quantify though.
It's very difficult to quantify, I know, but then again, you can bring up good examples of where it's so clear that that is the key. Okay.
But isn't that the sort of key to everything? There's like a hardcore 10% that contribute like everything that brings all the users. So for example, YouTube would be a really good example of that, where the amount of people that really post the videos that bring the crowds is a very small amount.
Yeah, it's like less than 3%.
Is that bad?
I'm not saying it is bad, but I'm just saying that's the way that things are. So
yeah.
I think something like Jaiku or Twitter, or even Flickr, are kind of different because everybody's bringing media to the table.
True. I think like my take on that is actually, which is interesting. That's an interesting point. Is that I see kind of two trends. One is and it kind of crystallizes in this hype around Second Life, which is towards a very rich experience, essentially total immersion in a virtual world. And I think all kinds of like heavy content is sort of pushing that way, like videos and stuff. And then there's this other megatrend that's happening at the same time, which, for lack of a better word, sort of misquoting Clay Shirky, who talked about the mass amateurization of media. I've sometimes mentioned this, that it's the mass Starbucksization of media, where the simile here is that if you think about a service like Jason was talking about MySpace, the MySpace pages are actually really, really rich, because there's all kinds of flashing stuff, and you can add YouTube videos, you can do all kinds of crazy things. And it's very difficult to kind of put that into a small mobile phone, like what Helio's trying to do, and I don't know if they're very successful at it. I kind of doubt it. There, just to finish off, if you can still hear me. So that is kind of like, you imagine this experience of like, think about coffee, okay? So it used to be that we would go for a coffee, and we would go to the cafe, and we would get that tray of coffee with like a nice, all this like a little tart or something, and we'd kind of have that social experience around the coffee table. And you watch what Starbucks did with basically the invention or the fine-tuning of the paper cup, that you can, it's coffee to go. So suddenly the experience of consuming coffee turned into a mobile experience. It turned into something that was much more frequent, and it was a throwaway thing. And essentially what it did as well, if you look at the figures of coffee consumption, it's boom. It's like really, really boom.
So like Twitter?
Huh?
So Twitter would be the
Exactly.
Starbucks?
That's what Twitter is doing to blogs.
Do you think that Starbucks are cleverer than us?
Sorry?
Starbucks, do you think they're cleverer than us? Because they did that in a physical world environment. I mean, how do you sell 100 cups of coffee a minute, Are they cleverer?
Well, the 80-20 rule actually you're talking about, on Twitter it's actually, I think, more pronounced, because the top 10 people have like over 2,000 each. So every time they send one message, it goes to 2,000 people. They send 10 messages, it goes to 20,000. They do 100 for the month. It's 200,000.
Fucking annoying.
Why?
Annoying thing. There's this one guy, and I won't name names, but he annoys the crap out of me. It's on Twitter, but it's because he just talks about rubbish all the time. It's just
Don't listen about that one.
no, exactly. You try to, but then because there's so
I think he's talking about Robert Scoble.
When you say no, you feel bad. You're like,
Don't feel bad for Scoble.
and so you go back 2 2 weeks later, and you hope he learned his lesson, and he,
Scoble never learns his lesson. He never learns.
Starbucks.
Why does every dinner have to go into a Scoble bash?
No, but I think that the resemblance with Starbucks here is kind of right, is that in the blogosphere we don't want all these kiddies talking the stupid stories. You want to have interesting stuff. They can talk their not interesting stuff on Twitter. Just as you, at Starbucks, you have all the people drinking coffee. Yeah, well, I'm an Italian. I know what coffee is supposed to be like. Starbucks.
Maybe I should have brought up that example. A more neutral one that involves like Antarctica and penguins or something. Probably the Linux people.
Can I just say, there are 2 things for me. One, if you use the word megatrends, you've been hanging out with Joy Ito too much. Second, Jaiku and Twitter were total turnarounds for me, in that I work in a mobile blogging site, which is fairly non-commercial, like we do loads of stuff, but the one thing and the integral thing missing with mobile is that when you work with a mobile, it's not a rich experience, and it never will be. Bring on the iPhone, whatever, it won't be, because it's just not tactile enough to provide the immersion that you need to be involved properly.
Right. I don't think it should be, by the way.
No, I agree, exactly, which is why when Twitter and Jaiku became apparent, I saw that persistent presence was the one thing which would allow a really practical method of just reintegrating the person into their online experience. That's all it is. The mobile should always ever be out. It shouldn't ever be an inward experience, I think.
Yeah, I think that's exactly, it's another way to phrase essentially what I was talking about. It's like, and excuse me for using the word megatrend, I'll try to refrain from that. That, what you were calling this inward versus outward thing. Inward being Second Life immersion, outward thing being actually being in the physical world. And actually that things that I want to come back just to briefly to the sociologist thing is, like, I think one of the things that I try to kind of keep our, O'Reilly has their radar, well, we can all have ours, right? Democratization of radars. And sort of the interesting things you tend to happen when someone picks up on a new phenomenon in the physical world that is somehow possible to turn into an online digital social object. So for instance, like location, it's just becoming that now in a way, because we're getting devices that can capture location and allow us to share it in a digital way. Like, when Flickr started, it was that we had digital cameras, we had camera phones that could turn photos into these kind of visuals. So that's one of the interesting things.
So it used to be that we used to write blog entries that were like Twitter. So like people like Dave Wine and Rebecca Blood would write like 50-word blog posts with no titles. So hasn't it just recapitulated what everyone was doing back in like 1998?
Yeah, it's interesting. I've been thinking about that too, because like, so sorry. So the question was essentially, aren't Twitter and Jaiku just a recap of what everyone was doing before blogs became blogs? Which is
before blogs became long, like 10, 20 photo articles.
So before blogs became, before we had articles where you had a title and a body for a post, we just had these very short, like one-liners essentially that people were posting. It's like Justin Hall's links.net, or like the first blog platform that I participated in writing was about being able to post by SMS. And then we realized that was a bad idea because blogs, as it turned out, were all about, because at some point I realized this, like I noticed Jason Kalkanis has left the building, so we're safe to talk about how he has managed to become such a popular blogger. I have this theory, which is if your blog isn't popular enough, here's what you need to do. You need to go and you need to write you pick an A-list blogger, and you write something about them, referring to one permalinkable blog post of theirs that they cannot refrain from, hitting back at you somehow. So you get them to write a rant on their blog, accusing you of something and linking to your blog post about them. which is the best way to channel all their readers to your
That
blog.
was really recent, and B, it already implies that you have some credence already. Because he's not going to reply to someone with no credence. Trust me, I've tried. Cory Doctorow won't diss me.
That could be a t-shirt.
You can't please all of the online digital activists all of the time. But you can please some of them some of the time.
How rude of you be?
Very!
What did you answer?
Actually, no, he was rude to me.
Did you say you're going to like ask
Somebody
his
was
mother or
rude
anything like that? Because that would kind of.
Oh my god, he's back!
One more question.
We need a blogging code of conduct.
Shut up, you wanker.
One more question.
Come on, Ian.
Go on.
It's completely different. So, Jaiku, are we looking at what? Do you think your plan long term is the long tail, small communities of people doing their thing, or is it going to be top 10 culture? Are you going to go after what everybody's thinking and saying at the moment? Because that for me is a really big thing as to whether it's for me or not.
It's a really hard question. So essentially, is my service, Jaiku, is it about attracting the celebrities that thousands of people follow, or is it about creating small pockets of people who, this full-time intimate communities of 4 to 6 people who share amongst themselves small worlds? I would have to say that, you look at, coming back to the virality of Twitter, I think, again, Joito said something that sort of applies, which is that Twitter partly was the Americas discovering SMS. And part of it was that that you had people, the celebrities of the geek world, who actively took it up, and immediately there was a large public who wanted to follow what they were doing. So I think in that sense it does make sense to attract celebrities, but my gut feeling, just from because one of the things that on Jaiku, we do stuff in Finland, so we got some of the Finnish celebrities, this lordy heavy metal monster rock band that's super popular, or they actually called us up, and so they started posting, and then for a week I was super excited about having Lordy on my thing and I could follow. But then at some point it got a little boring because they're not really my friends. So maybe if I'm a super diehard hardcore fan, yes. But I still kind of feel when you talk about, I was trying to make this point about the more sustainable stuff, then definitely probably the small pockets.
Sure, this is MySpace and Facebook, but it's Jaiku and Twitter.
Except you're talking a magnitude lower number of users.
The principle is the same. I mean, I don't mind joining Facebook, and actually the only reason I ever joined MySpace was to check out how it worked. But Facebook, even though I'm not a socially networky person, I'm kind of a little interested because it's very clean.
Yeah.
Jaiku, I still can't figure out, but in comparison to Twitter, it's clean and usable, and it's because it's your network.
Except it's so complex you can't figure it out. Well, it's a bad.
The thing about Flickr when I was in Austin 2 months ago, is when everyone at South by Southwest, the big conference there, which is like Reboot, except it's 10 times the size. They're all using Twitter, not to kind of follow Robert Scoble because nobody cared, and I know that because I was with him, and nobody cared. Although I love him to death, but
Robert cares.
Well, Robert, okay, all right, okay. No, I mean, it wasn't no one turned up to Austin just to follow Robert around. What happened? Twitter became this really great social tool, so everybody who's at South by Southwest could tell each other where the good parties were, where the free booze was, and everyone would say, "Yeah, man, Maggie Mae's Mountain 6th Street, dude, 9 o'clock. Zoomer's paying," and then we all went, "Yay, free booze!" and we all went there. And it actually became useful, not just, here's a picture of my navel, I'm going to block this.
Has anyone found Twitter or Jaiku useful?
Hello, I just told you why it was useful.
I know,
I just told you why it's useful.
I recently moved here to London, and I used my Twitter and recently Jaiku mainly because I know a lot of people here that I don't know, that I just meet here. Put them in my Twitter, and Twitter is very like MSN. It's you don't need to reply.
Yeah.
I see
Jason
people saying,
runs his
hey, I'm
own
going
business
to
on
this
Twitter.
geek dinner.
And nobody.
No, I'm not going.
No, you basically run your business on Twitter, or you pretty much. I mean,
everything.
You know, Jason runs his business on Twitter. It's not about some asshole marketing jackoff advertising dickhead.
Twitter
Think about
gets so
ROI.
well indexed. Like when I Google myself, which I don't do that often.
No, I don't believe you.
Twitter is fucking right up there after like fucking 8 years online.
But it's not
Twitter
about,
is up at
it's
10.
not about Google, right? I mean, the thing about Twitter, right, is it
Guys.
Ian, just one.
No, come on!
No, it's getting late. Take this offline, okay? So, big hands for Jyri. He's actually very nervous, but not anymore.
And if you want any more Jyri or Jason, come to NMK Forum tomorrow.
And Mike isn't drunk!
And Mike's not drunk. Also, there's still some wine left. Which is crazy. You guys were drinking the wine. I think there's some food left as well, so obviously I can go to waste.
Some red. You, some red for...
And thank you very much for coming. And the next geek dinner, I think, might be in 2 weeks' time. We're planning to do some a new event called PowerPoint Karaoke. It may be sometime in between. And if you haven't played Werewolf, look out for it on upcoming. So, thanks for coming, guys.